in person. Hi everyone on Zoom. Thank you for coming today to support the Parks Department and the amazing research interns, Bria and Ella, who are gonna be presenting to us today. I'm Anna. I think I know most of you. This was a great summer. Bria and Ella did some incredible research that will certainly inform the Parks Department moving forward. And I'm really grateful that they were with us this summer, that it was a possibility to have staff this summer in the Parks Department. And I hope you all enjoy it. I will stop the bird sounds now. We are recording over Zoom, and I'll also be recording from a phone just in the back of the room, FYI. So this presentation will be available after today as well.
Great, thank you, Anna. So, thank you everyone for coming. And we'll get right into an introduction. My name is Bria, and I'm one of the interns here this summer. I just finished my associate in science degree from Oakland Community College, and I worked with the Michigan DNR for a year before coming here. And I hope to go into something in natural resources.
Ella, are you with us? Okay, part of
yeah, sorry, I was muted. My bad. Yes, okay. Hi, my name's Ella. I'm gonna be a junior. I'm studying at the University of Michigan, and I'm studying environment. I'm not 100% sure what I want to do with this going forward, but I know that I want to be involved in more research. So this was a really good introduction to that. Yeah, I'm in Sweden right now, so that's why I have to be on Zoom. But I was in person for all the research done in Ann Arbor. So yeah, very excited about the presentation.
Yeah, so what we were hired to do this summer was create a breeding bird survey and an invasive plant survey and implement both of those surveys at West Scio Preserve. And then create a management plan and report, and of course this presentation on that. And this is building off of the 2021 report done by Anna and James. They did a similar bird survey and a vegetative survey. So we're not doing a full vegetative survey, we're focusing on invasive plants.
Yeah, and also before we get into that, we wanted to give a quick thanks to a couple people that helped us format our research. So firstly, we want to thank the Parks, Preserves, and Pathways Committee for having us here and providing this opportunity for us to be interns. It's been a really great experience. We also want to thank Anna for really teaching and supporting us throughout our work. She's been a really, really great boss. We also want to thank our coworkers, Sam and Walker. They're the park stewards this summer, and they not only just supported us, but they also helped us with some of our data collection. So that was really great. We also want to thank the volunteers who helped us with our night survey. And then we want to thank Hav, who was really instrumental in the development of our methods for our bird survey, as well as like the point marking. And then Julia Berger and Greg Norwood for just their general expertise on bird surveys and optimal data collection methods. And then Shika Singh, who gave us a lot of really valuable insight in terms of invasive plants. And then also Chris and IT for setting up the ArcGIS, which was really, really helpful for us this summer in terms of data collection. And then just generally everyone else who supported us, and then you guys for just being here and listening to the presentation. So to just give a kind of a general overview of what we're going to be talking about, we're going to talk about the West Scio Preserve and just kind of the background of the preserve. We're going to talk about our invasive plant survey, our breeding bird survey, and then kind of our conclusions and our thoughts about what kind of comes next. And also we will be taking questions at the end, so kind of save that for then. Okay, so just to give a bit of general background about West Scio, it's one of the 7 preserves that are owned by the township. And then Bria's just going to explain briefly this map here.
Yeah, so this is a map kind of showing where West Scio is in comparison to us. So we're up here at the Scio Township Hall. West Scio is down here. We have Jackson Road that runs through here, and I-94. So West Scio is actually pretty close to us here.
Yeah, and then one thing that's really unique about West Scio is the fact that it's believed to be one of the largest forested areas that hasn't been cut by roads in the county, in Washtenaw County. And this is really important because it provides a habitat to wildlife who are and who have been affected by habitat fragmentation. And then this is just kind of a map of the 7 parcels that comprise West Scio Preserve. And then it has the years that the Parks Committee has purchased them. And then I think one thing that's kind of important to note is like as Bria mentioned, Anna and James conducted a natural resource survey in 2021 of West Scio, but that wasn't for the 2 parcels that were purchased in 2021, as well as the parcel that was purchased in 2003, because that had not yet been incorporated into the preserve. And also when they were doing their natural resource survey, the West Scio was about 124 acres, and the West Scio now currently is 217 acres. So it looks a lot different.
Yeah, so now we'll move into a little of the natural history of West Scio. So taken from the 2021 report, according to the research of Wilbur Hinsdale, a major Native American path and trade route passed through the southwest corner of what is now West Scio Preserve. And so you can see in this map, the highlighted is the Native American Trail. The red outline is West Scio. So in the 1800s, a lot of West Scio was wet prairie. And you can see that purple color up there on the map. That's wet prairie. And the black outline is West Scio. It was likely maintained through intentional fire by the Native Americans. And it was pretty open, maybe just a few oak trees. And then post-European settlement, maybe like 1940s, there was a lot of agricultural land. All the wet prairie was probably drained and likely farmed. And so the Native Americans stopped burning, trees grew in. Cows grazed in what used to be wet prairie, but was then at that point swamp. Based on our research, we came to the conclusion that the trees here are at least 80 years old and no more than 100 years old, which is actually pretty young. And so here's some evidence that we see out there of this history and history of farming. We have on the left some agricultural equipment. We don't exactly know much about it, but we see it out in the woods. And then on the right, we have something that could have been a drainage ditch. And so here's a more full map of pre-settlement vegetation, 1800s. We have the purple being wet prairie, and that kind of follows Honey Creek. Honey Creek comes up around here, and then there's a branch that comes down this way. And then we have this kind of greenish yellow color, as well as the pink being drier forest. This orangish brown is hardwood swamp, and this light color is oak barren, which is another open landscape that was maintained by fire. So now in the next slide, this is the current vegetation. You can see the swamp moved in where the wet prairie was. All this pink here is now dry forest. The white is old field. So these were fields that were farmed at some point or another. And what's left of the wet prairie is up in this corner, and it's pretty degraded. So there's a lot of reed canary grass and buckthorn in there, which are 2 invasives that we'll get to later. But there are some remnants in there. There's a few native plants that could have been from that prairie. So here's some pictures of the current West Scio habitat types. We have old field, southern hardwood swamp, wet prairie, dry mesic southern forest, and vernal pool. And their vernal pool is really special. We have a lot of really unique animals that live in there. There's salamanders and I think berry shrimp, there's a few different ones in there. And so the vernal pool actually drains later in the season. So it's only flooded certain times of the year, but it's really unique, and we have a couple of those in West Scio. So here's a map of the current habitat types. This is the map that we used in our survey and in our analysis of the data. So we see the green here is the dry forest, blue is swamp, yellow is wet prairie, orange is our old fields. And then we also have this pink color down here, which is just planted pines. So there's not really much in there. There's not much vegetation along the ground. And then we also have these red outlines here are our 2 vernal pools.
Okay, and then talking about invasives, according to Michigan DNR, an invasive species is one that is not native and whose introduction causes harm or is likely to cause harm to the economy, environment, or human health. I think it's also important to differentiate that there are a lot of non-native plants in Michigan, and most of them are harmful because they can escape and colonize native ecosystems. Where the difference lies between these plants and the invasives is that the invasives have the potential, again, to cause damage to the environment. And then just speaking about some of the possible effects invasives can have, they can have effects on the economy, and this kind of looks like it's pretty broad. It could be over various sectors, but they can reduce agricultural productivity by competing with crops and livestock for resources. And then this just results generally in decreased yields and increased production costs. Invasive species can also impact forestry, recreation, and the tourism industry because they can degrade natural landscapes and reduce aesthetic value of recreational areas. And then they also have environmental impacts. Invasive plant species can have significant negative impacts on native ecosystems because they often outcompete native plants for resources such as sunlight, water, and other nutrients, which leads to a loss of biodiversity and just a general alteration of natural habitats. They also have the potential to disrupt ecological processes such as nutrient cycle and pollination, which again just affects the overall health and functionality of ecosystems. And then finally, invasives have the potential to affect human health and safety. This can look like certain species can produce toxic substances or have physical characteristics that may harm people who come into contact with them. This can lead to allergic reactions or skin irritations or just other general health problems.
So why do we even care? I'll start by saying that according to the U.S. Forest Service, invasive species have contributed to the decline of 42% of U.S. endangered and threatened plants. So kind of like Ella mentioned, invasive species compete directly with native plants for water, sunlight, and nutrients. They can outcompete native plants so easily because invasive plants often thrive on disturbed soil, which we have a lot of with our farming history. They also produce large amounts of seed, spread easily, and can grow very dense. So they crowd out the native plants and compete with them for resources. Some invasives also release chemicals that prevent other plants from growing around them. So the pictures on this slide were actually taken out at West Scio. So we can see we have a lot of native plants. We have southern blue flag up here, which was found in the swamp. We have wild geranium down in the right, which was found in the drier forest. We also have a bumblebee on some milkweed and monarch on some goldenrod. So with that, the objective of our invasive plant survey was to collect data to use as a baseline for future monitoring. We focused on collecting basic data that can be used for the management of invasives, and in the future, our data can be expanded upon to learn more about how the invasive plants are affecting West Scio. So we chose to focus on a few priority invasive plants, which includes those likely to cause harm if left unchecked, as well as new species uncommon to the area that should be caught early if they're present at West Scio. And we also chose to focus on high quality areas. So for example, the fields are full of non-native plants and invasives. So doing a survey in there wasn't really beneficial. We want to protect what's already there, the native plants, the high quality areas that are already there. So we didn't do a full survey of the field, but we did it everywhere else.
Yeah, and then just building upon that, when we started setting out developing our methods, we realized that we cannot map all the invasive plants in West Scio, so we chose to prioritize certain species, and we settled on common buckthorn, garlic mustard, and multiflora rose. And we decided this because these plants were the ones that we noticed were the most common in West Scio, but they also were still within a manageable population size. They were also the plants that appear most likely to cause ecological damage most quickly and be more difficult to manage if they were left unchecked. The factors that kind of contribute to this are West Scio habitat types, sunlight and soil moisture, as well as these specific invasives plant seed production. And speaking more about that, garlic mustard and multiflora rose, they can stay viable in the ground for many years. So this makes it really difficult to control these invasive spread if a seed bank is established. And then just some other invasives we thought we would point out that we didn't necessarily prioritize are Japanese knotweed and Japanese stiltgrass. These species have no or a few known locations in West Scio, but they are on the Midwest Invasive Species Information Network's watch list for Washtenaw County. And this kind of just means that they're really new to the area, and if they are found, they really need to be controlled quickly before they have a potential or possibility to spread. And then, yes, we had one location of Japanese knotwood in the parking lot outside of West Scio and the Dino Drive entrance. But then for the stiltgrass, we don't know of any locations within the preserve. And then just a few additional species that we kind of watched out for but didn't, again, prioritized are reed canary grass, autumn olive, phragmites, amber honeysuckle, Japanese barberry, and oriental bittersweet. And then just to highlight a few of these and kind of the rationale we had behind not focusing specifically on them. In terms of reed canary grass, it's already extremely widespread in West Scio, and it would take a really tremendous effort and a lot of time and resources to restore the area. These areas colonized by reed canary grass back to a natural state, because West Scio is very wet, as we know, and like the swamp and wet prairie are pretty dominated by the reed canary grass in the wetter areas. And then in terms of autumn olive, this species is pretty unlikely to colonize in West Scio that quickly because, again, West Scio is fairly wet and shaded, and autumn olive prefers dry soils and sunlight. But then, yeah, moving forward, these are kind of species we could potentially do future surveys for in an aim to prevent them from becoming more common in the preserve.
Yeah, so getting into our invasive plant survey methods, this map is basically showing the overall methods that we did. We chose to do kind of a transect method. So we can see the yellow lines here are transects, and that basically involves laying out lines relatively straight. Sometimes we did follow like a trail or something, but basically walking those lines and just looking for all the invasive plants that are out there and mapping them as we go. So you might notice that some of these transects are farther apart and some are closer together. Our reasoning for that was some areas of West Scio are a lot more dense, and so we can't see as far. And those are the lines that are closer together. That way we don't miss any invasive plants. And then the ones that are farther apart are the areas that were more open, so we're able to see farther and spread out more. So when we're doing our survey, we used ArcGIS field maps. And so we are able to set it up on the computer with the information we need and then take it out into the field on our phone. So you can see these screenshots here is what we would see in the field. We're able to mark a location, put in our information. And we used to basically points and polygons. Our 3 points, we use different shapes. We have circle here, that's individual plant or just a few or several. A square, which would be about the size of half a tennis court. And then a triangle, which is larger up to the size of about half a football field. And if the population is that large or larger, we would use a polygon. So in that case, we'd walk around the edge of the population and map it on field maps. So you can see in the screenshot here, that little red blob, that's kind of the corner of a polygon. And so some of the information we were gathering during our survey was the species, population size, which would be the points or polygons, population density, which we used 1 through 4, 1 being really sparse and 4 being super dense where there's no other plants besides that invasive growing. We also included last observed date and active management, yes or no. And that'll just help us in future management and keeping track of where we've done management. So in the field, during our invasive plant survey, a lot of times we line up along a trail, and if we had 2 more people, we kind of just spread out and make sure we can see the invasive plants between each other, that we were not missing anything. And we'd walk our lines. If we saw something, we'd pull out our phone, map it on field maps.
And then kind of looking at our results, as you can see on this map we created, there are some general trends in terms of where the invasives are spread out. I also think it's really cool to point out, you can see this new trail, if Bria can like show you on the map, maybe there. Yeah, this is new. This is because of the work of Sam and Walker, again, the park stewards that worked alongside us. So yeah, I just think that's interesting to point out. Yeah, like recognize their hard work. Yeah, and so then again, like has Bria kind of mentioned how we recorded data on the map. We use the different symbols to denote how big the area the invasive was taking up within the preserve was, and then also the polygons if it was bigger than half an acre. And then the different colors correspond to the different invasives. And then obviously you can see some general trends here. We see that clustered along the trail, there's a lot of invasive clustered along the trail and near the roads and the parking lots because these are areas of high spread. They're also disturbed areas where this is where a lot of invasives tend to be. We also see large populations of invasives at the wood and field edges because there's more sunlight here. And again, the field is a disturbed area because it was previously farmed. And as we mentioned previously, we didn't survey the field because we didn't consider it to be an area of high quality. Like if there had been something like a vernal pool, it would be a different story, but it was just previously farm field. So we didn't decide it was beneficial to survey. It's also, the fields are almost all non-native or invasive plants. So this would be a pretty extensive effort if we tried to do so. And then specifically looking at the invasive garlic mustard, kind of what we noticed here this is a map that shows the different habitat types. We saw that garlic mustard is primarily concentrated in the dry mesic southern forest habitat type. And again, it's mostly along the trail in the new part of West Scio. And this is important to highlight because garlic mustard will likely spread along said trail if we don't make an effort to manage the population. And then just, again, I should have done this in the beginning, but just kind of some background on garlic mustard. It's a very competitive invasive, and it can thrive in a large range of soils and as well a large range of sun, shade, and moisture. But it prefers to grow in wet soil near creeks and on dry, steep slopes. And then also a thing that I think is kind of important to notice or to note in terms of spread is we usually consider animals to spread along the trails, but also people can spread. So if you're ever like in the woods and you have a bunch of seeds or something on your pants or on your clothes, this is a way that invasives are using you to spread. And then looking at multiflora rose can inhabit stream banks and wetlands, and it tolerates a variety of soil conditions and thrives in both sun and shade. It spreads really aggressively, and it does so by rooting canes, and its seeds being dispersed by wildlife. And then one thing that's really impressive, but also really scary about multiflora rose is its seed can remain viable for up to 20 years. And then kind of looking a little bit forward, multiflora rose is also really can be very detrimental to native birds because it can deter them from nesting. And then kind of, again, looking at this map, we see multiflora rose is mainly concentrated along the trails, but most of them are small. Most of the points we documented are pretty small individual plants. There wasn't a lot of large, very like dense populations of multiflora rose in the preserve. And then looking at buckthorn, buckthorn can form in dense thickets, which reduces the resource availability for native species. It also is pretty adaptable. It has a wide range of habitat types, and it can grow in fields and roadsides and in prairies, and it will grow in wet areas and also a variety of woodlands. And it actually really likes wet areas, so that's not so great for West Scio. And then in terms of spread, buckthorn produces a lot of berries, and those are transported extremely easily by animals, and this further facilitates the spread of the invasive. And then looking at the map, we see that the large polygons at the end of the swamp, field edges, and wet prairie of buckthorn, and this is again just highlighting how well buckthorn does in wet areas.
Yeah, so getting into a little bit of the management of invasives. Here along the top, I have actual pictures from within West Scio, and underneath I have a picture from left to right, garlic mustard invasion, buckthorn invasion, and multiflora rose invasion. So that's what could happen to each of these areas if we don't manage, just to give a general picture. And so for invasive plant management, I'll just kind of give a general overview. If you're interested in learning more, we'll have our report coming out. But some plants, like garlic mustard, can be pulled or sprayed with herbicide. Other ones, like woody invasives, like that would be autumn olive, multiflora rose, buckthorn, they can be cut and then stump treated. Another method is prescribed burning. So like I mentioned before, the natives potentially burned. A lot of these native Michigan landscapes really open, and that was from fire. So it's really fire dependent. So prescribed burning can actually help control invasives if it's done at the right time of year. And so right time of year, spring or fall, the thing that we really want to look at is, for example, for garlic mustard, we want to burn in the spring, not the fall, because if we burn in the fall, garlic mustard is releasing its seeds, and so the fire could actually spread the seeds. So if we were to do prescribed burning, we really, really want to look at what we want to gain from that. But it can be really beneficial because it can help actually the native plants along with getting rid of the invasives. So in terms of control management practices, like I mentioned before, we want to protect what we already have first. So our high quality, full of native plants, sensitive areas, we want to protect those first. So within those areas, we start at the smaller populations of invasive plants and then work towards the larger populations. That way we're using our time and resources most effectively. If we were to start at the larger populations and work towards the smaller ones, then while we're working on the larger populations, the smaller ones are just get bigger and we'd just be going in a circle. So on the slide, you can see on the left here, these are pictures that I actually just took today. On the top, we have hardly any plants, some garlic mustard, and the reason for that is it was right around buckthorn. It was a big buckthorn shrub with some smaller ones around it. And then on the bottom was not by any invasive plants. So it gives you an idea of what these plants can actually do.
And then some potential future research that can be built upon ours is, first of all, on this map, maybe if Bria could point out kind of where West Scio is, because this is highlighting some other properties of Scio Township. And then also just like maybe point out some of the other properties that the township has, because I think this is all kind of new to me, so I think it's interesting. Some future research that could be done is potentially other departments or other parks departments could use similar methods to survey their parks and kind of get a good feel about what invasives they have, which can help with future management. And then going with that also, maybe this establishes a sort of benchmark that can be used for a continuous monitoring program. The ARC technology was really helpful to us, and it's pretty buildable, right? So you can input more data into this and also mark areas as treated and how they're treated, which helps with management overall. It's a really easy interface. This helps just kind of understand the makeup and spread of invasives in a region. Also, hopefully there can be a survey for other invasive species. As we mentioned, there's some species we weren't able to specifically focus on, but potentially in the future, there could be more detailed and focused surveys done on said plants. And then overall, this kind of research just helps us getting understanding of what's in the region, and this leads to us being able to, or people being able to draft kind of an optimal management plan with the invasives in mind. And then just some key takeaways from our invasive inventory. West Scio is really a very amazing place, and it's really worth protecting. It's not like past point of return. There's a lot of native plants there, in spite of the invasives, that are thriving. So there needs to be, I think, an effort put into it, and put into managing the invasive plants, and obviously managing the invasive plants and helping the native plants thrive. And then this looks like further surveys and general monitoring in order to keep the preserve healthy.
So now we'll get into our breeding bird survey, which I'm sure everyone is most excited about. So breeding bird surveys are something that's done all over the world. They're generally done in order to assess what birds are present and breeding in an area. So many birds that are here in the summer are neotropical migrants, meaning they overwinter in Mexico, Central and South America. They want to get out of the cold just like us. And they come here to breed. And they come here to breed because the areas that are here meet all their needs, such as nesting locations, protection from predators, and food. So these areas here where they come to breed are really important. We did our survey at the peak of breeding season in order to collect breeding evidence. So birds breeding at West Scio means that it's special and it provides birds with everything they need. So yeah, this summer we were tasked with refining and building upon the 2021 breeding bird survey. So we're actually able to compare between the surveys. And we also wanted to make something that was replicable, that volunteers can be used in the future, and it can be compared easily year to year. And so generally, when we're doing a bird survey, it's not just counting the birds, seeing what ones are out there, but we really want to understand the birds and really get a story of how healthy this area is, and like what's important, what we can manage, how we can protect these birds.
In terms of the importance of general breeding bird surveys, they help us with conservation and population monitoring, habitat assessment, furthering and providing a baseline for future research, and education and public engagement. In terms of conservation, bird surveys provide critical information on bird populations, and monitoring bird populations over time helps identify species that may be declining or be at risk, allowing for more targeted conservation efforts. And then looking at habitat assessment, bird surveys help to evaluate the quality and suitability of habitats for various bird species. And then monitoring the presence and abundance of different bird species in habitats helps scientists and conservationists gain a better understanding of the specific requirements, habitat requirements for each species. And this is really crucial information when you're trying to have habitat management and restoration efforts. And then in terms of kind of a baseline for future research, bird surveys kind of contribute to the scientific research and help answer questions scientists have about bird behavior and migration patterns and overall kind of breeding success. And then in order to, answer these big questions, we need long-term data, and this data needs to be collected regularly. And then surveys can help do so and support studies for the future in terms of, avian ecology and kind of the impacts that changes in the natural environment can have on overall bird health. And then looking at public engagement, bird surveys are pretty accessible, so they provide a platform and kind of opportunities for a more citizen science-based research, and this kind of this has the potential to foster public engagement and kind of awareness around local bird populations. So then for our specific survey, if we look at the different data collection methods, we use point count survey, general survey, and a night bird survey. First, point count survey, this was the survey method that was most number focused. The data was more number based, and it was the most time efficient survey method. And then for the general survey, this one we were able to be a bit more concerted in our efforts to look for breeding evidence, because it was a more meandering based survey. So we were able to follow birds and specifically looking for breeding evidence. And the night survey was really cool because we were able to use unique methods such as playback, which we didn't do in any of the other surveys. And we were also able to get a more complete picture of the birds in West Scio, because obviously some birds aren't that active during the day. So we were able to see the ones that were more active during the night.
So for our data collection in our bird survey, we used eBird, which anyone who birds might know about. So you can see the screenshots down here on the left corner. We basically used it to create locations of our points during our point count. We are able to start a checklist, create a location, and then you can see on the middle screenshot, we have a list of birds. We can type in the bird that we're looking for or scroll through the list. And then it brings up to our next screenshot. We can put in the number of individuals that we're seeing. We can put in any notes and then a breeding code. So breeding codes are what we use to actually determine whether that species is breeding in West Scio. And these codes are taken from the Michigan Breeding Bird Atlas. We have observed, possible, probable, and confirmed. Observed is really just no breeding evidence. The bird might just be flying over, probably not breeding in the preserve. Possible, there's a chance of them breeding. This might be just a singing bird or a bird that's in its correct habitat. And then it brings us to probable. That's where if we're near a nest, we might see a bird doing alarm calls, they're agitated, or we see a singing male present over a week in the same place. So that means it's marking out its territory. And then we have confirmed, which includes nest building, fledged young, carrying food, or a bird feeding young. And so our next slide will have some breeding evidence that I'll show you. On the left, actually, all these pictures and videos were taken in West Scio. On the left, we have a wood thrush sitting in a nest. That was really exciting. On the right, we have a female red-winged blackbird carrying food. And then in the middle, I have a video of a northern flicker feeding young. So if you watch closely, you'll see the tiny little beak peeking out of the tree. Oh, yeah. See that? So that was really exciting. But that's the kind of evidence that we're looking for when we're doing our bird survey.
And then talking about specifically the point count method, the goal of using this method was to be time efficient and create a methodology that could be accurately repeated in the future. And we were aiming to collect bird population data as well as breeding evidence. So for our points, we placed our points 250 to 300 meters apart, and this was guided by the experts we talked to in drafting our data collection methodology. And we aimed to put our points in areas so that they could be equally distributed among the habitats to kind of get an accurate picture of what birds were in what habitat types. And then we collected our data at the points at the same time of day for each point count in the mornings, and we spent 10 minutes at each point. And then kind of a view of what it looked like when we were doing the actual data collection. We would start around sunrise, 6 or 7 a.m., and spend about 10 minutes at each point. What we did is we would set up the predetermined points, and Bria is much more proficient in bird call ID than I am. So we would listen and watch for different birds. And then if we saw breeding evidence, we would also document this and the type of bird and the number of bird and then what habitat they were in by, tracking them or placing them at a certain point we were collecting. And these are just some pictures from our collection. So that's a hawk, and that's the way we kind of marked our points is the orange ribbon tied to the tree. And then looking at our general survey methods, the goal here was to collect breeding bird evidence and detect birds that are more quiet and elusive that we might not necessarily see at our points. This was a much more flexible data collection methodology because we were able to use a more meandering based survey method. It was also much more flexible. We had our coworkers, Sam and Walker, actually come out and help us do it one day. So the time was more flexible because it didn't need to be as tightly controlled as a point survey method. There's also breeding evidence all day. So we could kind of go out and look for that whenever. And then this is some of the pictures that we got from our general surveys, just kind of wandering around. We spent a lot more time in the field because there's like a lot of birds in the field that we wanted to kind of further investigate. And we tried to move, again, very slowly and quietly. So this allowed us to see a lot more birds, as well as nests. So we kind of like seeked out some nests. So if you see there in the circle, that's a really cool Cooper's hawk's nest. That was a really cool find. So, yeah.
So that brings us into our night survey. Like Ella mentioned, we used pretty unique methods for this. It was similar to our point count, except we weren't traveling between the points. We actually just stayed at the point the whole time. And so we actually used volunteers for this. So we met the volunteers and went over the map, the protocol, and we went out and everybody was in groups of 2 or 3, stayed at their point the whole time, just listening, had eBird out. And so we're hoping to find some of our night birds like owls. And then we actually used playback. So we used playback for the eastern screech owl, and I'll play for you what that sounds like. That basically involves playing a recording of that bird and hoping for a response. So here's what the eastern screech owl sounds like. So that's the sound we played out in the field. And we did actually get a response. So that was really exciting. We weren't sure if it would work or not, but it did. So yeah, that was great. No.
Okay. So from our data collection, we had in West Scio a total of 64 species. They're not all displayed here, but this is a picture that shows some of the species we found. And then looking at kind of the spread of the species, this is a chart that we mocked up of the total count of individuals by species in the preserve. And as you can see on the x-axis, there's a lot of different species present in the preserve. But some bird species are much more prevalent than others. We can see we have a lot of like black-capped chickadees, song sparrows, eastern wood pewees, but we don't have so many rose-breasted grosbeaks or yellow-throated tanagers or eastern wood pewees. So yeah, I thought that was just interesting to look at. And then again, kind of focusing in on the habitat types, just to kind of retouch because this is relevant to the future information. We can see here that the habitat types we have in West Scio are the old field, the dry mesic southern forest, the hardwood swamp, and the wet prairie. And then also in kind of delineating between where we are finding birds and like reference to the habitat types, we included the edge habitat on the field, in the field, because as the field, even though there might be some double counting here in terms of habitat type because they obviously were bordering. And then this chart here shows the number of bird species recorded by habitat type. So we can see that in the field, there was 50, in the forest, there was 43, in the swamp, there was 24. It's also important to note that more than a species can be in more than one habitat type. So it's not mutually exclusive. But I think this kind of gives a general understanding of how the spread of the birds in West Scio looks in terms of habitat type. And then going forward, we found 16 new species this year as compared to the report done in 2201. This isn't all the species, but these are just a few that a picture to highlight a few of the ones we found. Specifically, we found yellow-throated vireo, great horned owl, and eastern towhee. And then we found 10 new species in the new section of West Scio that was recently acquired. So I think this kind of highlights the importance of future land acquisition and protected land acquisition by the township. And then going back to this map of when different parcels were acquired for the preserve, again, the 2021 and 2003 are new parcels that have been incorporated into the preserve. And again, it's the fact that we found new birds in these areas highlights the importance of the township buying new land.
So again, we found 64 total species out in West Scio. And so we'll focus on a few here. We'll focus on indicator species. When we're talking about our bird survey and looking at results, again, we're not just looking at numbers or being amazed by them, although we're also amazed by them. We're essentially reading the story of the landscape. So everything is tied together and birds are an important piece of that. So by understanding which birds are absent or present, or which ones are common and ones that are breeding, we can piece together the story and understand how we can actually protect our land. So getting into that, first we have the yellow-throated vireo. So again, we talked to an ecologist from the Michigan DNR, and he gave us a lot of this information, which was great. So the yellow-throated vireo, a lot of times is found in tall trees, open deciduous woods, and is found in younger forests, which, like we mentioned, this forest is pretty young. But it is an important indicator of a healthy forest. Next, we have the scarlet tanager. Scarlet tanager is an indicator of forest size. So it needs a pretty big area of forest to actually thrive. And so it's one of the first to go if the forest shrinks. So the fact that we actually have scarlet tanagers in West Scio is telling us that we have a large, healthy forest. The scarlet tanager also prefers older canopy trees, unbroken canopy, and again, needs a large amount of forest. Third, we have the wood thrush, which also need a large forest, but they can hang on longer than the yellow-throated vireo or the scarlet tanager if the forest shrinks. But its presence indicates a valuable forest. And so, like we said, we actually found a wood thrush nest, which was exciting. Something interesting about the wood thrush is that it can be parasitized by the cowbird. And so we see in this nest here, the two blue eggs are the wood thrush eggs, and the more brownish one is a cowbird. So the cowbird will actually lay its eggs in the wood thrush nest and make the wood thrush raise its babies. So that could be something to look at in the future and see, is the wood thrush actually successful breeding, or is it being parasitized? Just some other things to look at potentially in the future. So now we have our woodpeckers. We found, again, all three of these and more in West Scio. We'll start with the northern flicker. It's often seen on lawns and open areas, even parks, just on the ground feeding on insects. It specializes in ants. But it does need forest and holes for nesting. So most woodpeckers nest in cavities, which are holes in dead trees. And the northern flicker needs a pretty big hole for nesting. We also have the hairy woodpecker on the right side here, which is similar to the downy woodpecker, which some people may know. But the hairy woodpecker is less common, it's larger, and it needs larger trees for nesting. It's not usually found in suburbs or city parks. And the removal of snags is causing the decline of the hairy woodpecker. And then in the middle here, we have the pileated woodpecker, which is the largest woodpecker in North America. And it needs a large area of forest. It has a pretty big territory. We don't see many of them, but they're crucial to the creation of holes for other cavity nesting species. Pileated woodpecker, since it's so big, a lot of times when it's looking for insects, it will drill holes, and those will turn into the cavities for nesting for other species. So the pileated woodpecker is a really important species, and the fact that it's in West Scio tells us that the entire ecosystem could be pretty healthy. We also found 3 owls in West Scio. which is really exciting for the small amount of area, only 217 acres. We have great horned owl, which is very adaptable. It's often found on farmland, but it needs a block of forest for breeding. Something interesting about it is that it specializes on squirrels. Then we have the eastern screech owl, which also requires a block of forest and suitable nesting cavities. We found the eastern screech owl within the swamp. We also have the barred owl, which is found in swamp habitat typically. The eastern screech owl and the barred owl were found pretty close to each other. And something else that's interesting, like we mentioned before, we did find a Cooper's hawk nest. That's really exciting. Cooper's hawks are not super common. You might know about the red-tailed hawk with the orange tail. Those ones are really common, but the Cooper's hawk is not as common. So it nests in pretty tall trees. You can kind of see in that picture, those are a lot of tall pine trees. It hunts by sneaking through dense cover and putting out a burst of speed to catch prey, which we think we might have seen that out there, but we don't know. We just saw a hawk just going through the bushes really fast. But also sometimes flies low over the ground and sneaks up on prey from behind bushes. We also have the rose-breasted grosbeak. This bird is a lot of times found in young forest, which goes back to our trees are now over 100 years old. So we're finding a mix of species so far that thrive in older forest, bigger diameter trees, and younger forests like this bird, smaller diameter trees. The rose-breasted grosbeak thrives in a structurally diverse canopy, which also tells us that West Scio is very diverse. It's also not found in smaller woodlots, so that's going back to telling us that we have a lot of woods here in West Scio. We also have the eastern towhee, which has declined in recent decades. This one is new this year from 2021. It's a lot of times found in open woods and brushy areas in the understory of woods. Another one, this one is not found in the woods, it's actually found in open areas like fields. This is the eastern bluebird. It declined with the loss of habitat and competition with other birds like house sparrows, which are not native for nesting places. And eastern bluebirds nest in cavities as well, even though they're not woodpeckers. They'll nest also in boxes that people make. And so with people creating nesting boxes, bluebirds have actually come back, which is really exciting. We also have the great blue herons. In West Scio, we have one of the largest great blue heron rookeries in Washington County. As of 2021, there were 57 nests. So great blue herons nest in colonies, pretty big nests at the top of trees, a lot of times in swampy areas and always near feeding areas, which are wetlands. So we have up here in the left, that's actually a picture we took out there. You can kind of see in there, it's a little hard to see, but those are actually fledgling blue herons that we found in the rookery. So we did not do a full survey of the rookery, but we did check on it and it is active. The herons did not abandon it. And I know there's some development going on north of the rookery. And we have a 300-meter buffer zone. So the rookeries and the herons are really sensitive to disturbance. If there's any sort of farming or development, or sometimes even people walking in the woods. When we were near the rookery, we had to be super careful that we're not disturbing them. But there's some development going on north of it, and they are respecting the 300-meter buffer zone, which is great, and the herons are breeding successfully. We did not find 8 species this year that were found in 2021. So I'll go through a few of them and then I'll focus in on a few. We have the mallard down at the bottom, which is common, and it could have been a chance that we didn't find it this year, so we're not worried about it. We have the cedar waxwing at the top here, also common. It was only seen in one location in 2021, so it could have been moving through. Its main breeding range is farther north, so it wasn't for sure breeding there. We also have the marsh wren that has erratic nesting territory, which means that we might find it breeding in one area one year and not in that area another year. But it doesn't really mean too much since they do move around in terms of breeding areas. We also have the tree sparrow that was found in 2021. And doing our own research on it, we discovered that the tree sparrow is in Michigan in the winter. Its breeding range is actually northern Canada and Alaska. So when it's found in 2021, it was probably migrating. And then focusing in on a couple more, we have first the ovenbird. We did not find it this year. This is one of our indicator species. So ovenbirds require a large unbroken forest, and it's kind of blinking out across Michigan. We're not exactly sure why we didn't find it this year, but one could be the possible loss of forest. There could also be other reasons. They could not be very common, and so we could have just missed it. We also have the red-headed woodpecker, which is a state special concern species. Red-headed woodpecker prefers open woodlands with large diameter trees and typically avoids a closed canopy. So historically, this would be oak barrens and floodplain forest, and sometimes, a lot of times, landscapes that were maintained by fire, which we don't really have a lot of in West Scio. We don't really have a lot of these open landscapes with trees spread out. So in 2021, possibly it was not found in very many places. Something interesting about it is that it can inhabit parks and golf courses with suitable nesting snags. So the fact that it's declining, I don't know. Then we have the black-billed cuckoo and yellow-billed cuckoo. These were found in 2021. But we think we know why, because in 2021, there was a caterpillar outbreak, and cuckoos tend to follow caterpillar outbreaks. They like dense growth, which is common at West Scio. But yeah, in 2021, there was a caterpillar outbreak, and they found both of these birds. This year, there's no caterpillars. We did not find them.
Yeah, and then just some key takeaways from the survey. We want to stress how important the preservation of West Scio is for the prosperity of declining bird species, as many species are relying on the preserve as an area for breeding. And if we want to protect those birds, we need to protect the preserve. And specifically, we need to protect the forest habitat. Just generally speaking, forest habitat is disappearing, and birds that need a large forest habitat and an unfragmented forest habitat are also disappearing because of this. So West Scio provides this really scarce habitat type, and we want to keep it that way. And also further it, and this looks like land acquisition. And land acquisition, again, stressing that it's extremely important. As we saw, there were 10 new species this year that were found in the section that West Scio has recently acquired. And these included the great horned owl, spotted sandpiper. We believe that West Scio should continue, or Scio Township, should continue purchasing and preserving land to ensure the success of current and hopefully new bird species. Bird species don't really see parcel lines. So the developments that are happening around West Scio affect the birds in West Scio. We need to use continued monitoring and again, further land acquisition in order to keep an eye on the bird species that we're using as indicator species, because they'll tell us about the health of the birds along with the health of the preserve in general. West Scio is a really amazing area. We shared the data we found with other ecologists, and they were really, really impressed by the species richness and overall diversity. So it's definitely one we should be making a concerted effort to protect. And then in terms of land management, the question kind of arises is what to do with the old fields that are in West Scio. So these fields were previously farmed fields. So obviously they're in a disturbed state. And again, as we mentioned previously, they're filled with invasives. They're not in a natural state. And there's a lot of discussion surrounding what to do with the fields. In terms of the birds in the area, in the field area, the birds we found in the field and on the field edge, these species overall have pretty stable populations in the field areas. However, more sensitive birds are found in the woods. So maybe if these fields were woods, those birds would also be found there. But yeah, there's a lot of different options on what we can do with these fields, and Bria is going to touch on some of those options.
Yeah, so this is kind of one of our questions that we have involving land management at West Scio. Kind of our main big question that nobody really knows the answer for. So we have kind of three options that have come up. First, we can allow organic farming or a community garden on these fields. Farming would likely be hay, which if we do that, and actually for both of these options, we want to be sure that it's low impact. So we want it to be organic. And if there's a hay field, we want to cut hay at the right time, because some of these field birds actually make nests in the grass. So if there's hay, they'll make their nest in the hay. So if we had hay in there, we'd want to harvest after the baby birds have already fledged the nest, which would be, according to our ecologist that we talked to, Greg, after July 15th. And this could lead to some crop losses by the farmers, but one option could be paying those farmers to offset the loss of the crop if we wanted to farm those fields. We'd also want to avoid cutting into the woods at all because our sensitive species are in the woods and require a large area of woods. We wouldn't want to cut into that or disturb it at all. Another option is to manage for the invasives in the fields and restore native prairie plants. Since a lot of West Scio was historically prairie, this could be an option. It could bring in a lot of native plants, insects, and help the birds even. The problem that we're potentially seeing with it is that it would require a lot of time and a lot of resources. And since, like Al mentioned, our field birds that we found have stable populations in the area, and we have a lot of fields and open land in the area, that's just something to think about. Our third option is to allow the fields to turn to forest. This would take a lot of time, but it would basically involve just letting it go and making sure the trees will grow in and managing for the invasive plants that could grow in there like shrubs. But that option could benefit our bird species that are declining, that rely on a large chunk of woods. While the field and edge species would likely diminish in that area, there are many places nearby that they could go, and our forest species would move in there, so it could help those. So there's a lot of things to think about involving these fields.
Yeah, and then looking at future bird surveys, we hope that this kind of survey methodology can apply to other parks departments, and they can, repeat the study using similar methods to kind of get a feel about what bird species are present in their preserves. We hope to survey West Scio every other year using the same methods, or at least like a point count, to see if anything is changing and like see where we could attribute that change. We also hopefully could do species-specific surveys, maybe focusing particularly on indicator species, or doing more in-depth surveys, like figuring out how successful nesting efforts are for specific bird species, such as wood thrush, which Bria previously mentioned, is sometimes parasitized by cowbirds. Also, we didn't have a chance to do this because of time constraints this year, but potentially doing a heron rookery survey. The heron rookery is like really unique and special to the preserve. And obviously, as again, we touched on, it is active, we know that, but we didn't really do an in-depth look at that. So going forward, potentially counting nests or, looking for specific evidence of breeding could be really, really cool and important to do. Yeah, and again, Bria mentioned this, but in specific to the heron rookery survey, Anna and James found it in their internship in 2021, and they spoke with the Woodview Commons, and in terms of developing around the region or around the rookery, they were really respectful of the 300-meter buffer zone recommended by the consultant that they brought in. And then in conclusion, we just again want to stress how important and interesting and amazing West Scio is, the preserve. It's really diverse in native plants and has a lot of really special birds. We really want to keep it healthy for the environment and for the community to enjoy. And again, even though there are invasives, they're still manageable, and there's still a lot of really great native plants in the preserves that should be protected. So we just need to manage and treat the invasives in order to let the native plants and birds thrive.
If you're interested in learning more, we'll have our report coming out on the website, sciotownship.org, on the homepage on Monday, August 28th. So if you're interested, definitely read it, highly recommend. We'll go a lot more in depth. You'll be able to learn even more. We'll have more recommendations and everything. It'll be super interesting. So thank you again for all coming, and we have about 20 minutes for questions.
Did you use, there's an app on that Cornell site that allows you, it identifies bird species by using a microphone on the phone. Did you use that? Did you find it to be accurate if you did use it?
We did use it sometimes, and actually we should have mentioned that in here. We did use it. The thing that I want to say about that is we used it to basically get an idea of, okay, what birds do we have? But we double checked it ourselves. So there were times that it came up with other birds that were like, oh, that's cool. And then we listened to it and we're like, there's definitely not one in there. Or it mistaked one bird for another. Like there was a song sparrow and it thought it was a green-throated warbler, black-throated green warbler. Yeah, and that was not there. We re-listened to it. So we did use it and it was super helpful, especially in picking up things that we didn't notice because there's a lot of birds all out there like all at one time. They're all singing at the same time. So it can be pretty easy to miss something. So that was super helpful for that, definitely.
Is that the same as the Merlin?
Is that Merlin you used or eBird for identifying the sounds?
Merlin for identifying the sounds. Mhm.
Did you take a picture of the hawk?
I did. Yeah, that hawk was actually found right outside the township hall on the pine tree over there. And it came up to me and she's like, Bria, there's a hawk. She went running up there.
You have a telephoto lens?
I do have a zoom lens. It's like 70 to 300 meters. So yeah, that's what we took some of these bird pictures with. Like the one in the top right corner, that's a song sparrow that's taken with that.
How do you tell if a bird is just flying over or if it's breeding in the area? I mean, obviously if you see a nest and stuff, I get that part, but how can you tell? Do you have to spot the bird repeatedly?
So for flyover, we basically define that as, a lot of times it was kind of just in the open area, like you'd see like a crow or a hawk or a turkey vulture just way up in the sky, fly over, and then it's gone. So we can't really get any breeding evidence from that. If they were like hopping from branch to branch within like the woods or something on the edge, or even if they just flew from one side to another, but we could still watch them, that wouldn't be a flyover. We just continue to watch them and see if we can get any further breeding evidence. And like if we see a pair, a male and female bird, or if we see birds fighting, something like that. But yeah, if they're just flying over like a crow, just right over, then that would just be a flyover.
And when you're counting them, do you actually say there's one, there's one, there's one? Or I mean, do you repeat it on different days at the same spot?
As far as our point count goes,
Yes.
yeah, so we did 2 surveys of our point counts, spaced a couple weeks apart. So yeah, we basically just stayed at each point for 10 minutes. And when we were counting multiple birds, we really only counted more than one if we know for sure. So if there's one sitting over there and over there, that would be 2. But if there's one sitting over there, we don't hear it for a while, and then it's sitting over there, we'd still only count that as 1 because it couldn't move.
Okay.
Mhm.
When you played back a song, a bird song at night, did you use this just a phone or did you have some larger speaker?
We just use our phone. I think someone might have had a speaker, but to get this Eastern Screech Owl, I think I was the one who played the recording of it
With a phone?
with a phone. Yep, I just had it on full volume and I think we played it for 6 seconds. We had in our protocol no more than 30 seconds 2 times, so that way we're not aggravating the birds.
Harassing it?
Yeah. So, but yeah, it was only like 6 seconds, played it, and then within 5 minutes, we heard a response. So yeah.
Did
Yeah, it
you,
took a few minutes.
no, go ahead. Did you hear birds other than owls at night?
We did, more so around sunset. A lot of those same species that sing really early in the morning were also singing around sunset. Not as many, but a few. But as soon as the sun actually set, it was mostly owls, and then we also had a spotted sandpiper at night. So that's a bird that we don't really see it very much, but it's in kind of like wetland and field areas, and it really actually only sings at night.
So whippoorwill or nighthawk?
No, we didn't find any of those, unfortunately. If we did, I would definitely go into detail on those. But yeah, really just the 3 owls, the spotted sandpiper, and then some of those birds that are also active in the early morning.
We have a few questions here on Zoom. Pam Boyd, if you're still here, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Thank you, yes. My question is, how much food do the invasive species provide for the birds? And assuming you were going to take them out, what would you replace that food source with? Thank you.
That's a good question. I know some invasive species like buckthorn, honeysuckle, they actually have berries, and sometimes the birds will eat those berries. But from my own research, I found that those invasive plants don't have as good of nutrition as the native plants for the birds. So if we were to get rid of the invasives, we would want to try to help the native plants at the same time. That way we're not getting rid of a food source, but ideally the birds would be eating from native plants that where they're getting the best nutrition, and it'll help them the most. It'll even like help them with breeding success when they're feeding their babies that food. They want their chicks to grow strong and be able to be healthy. So yeah, we definitely want to help the native plants as well, and try to get those to be established.
Yeah, I also think it's kind of funny because it's a bit of a catch, right? Like if the invasive plants are feeding the birds, then the birds are eating the berries or whatever, and then facilitating the spread of the invasive. So it's, it's better to have native plants there. And as Bria said, again, the more like nutritional native plants for the birds.
I also see Rita has her hand raised. Rita, would you like to unmute?
Yes, for one thing, I don't have the best signal at the moment. It was really good for a long time anyway. I really enjoyed this presentation, and I think you guys did a wonderful job of very systematically and thoroughly explaining what you did and what your goals were. I look forward to seeing your full report on August.
Thanks, Rita. Yeah, August 28th. I also see Rob Pattinson on Zoom with his hand raised. Would you like to unmute? Thank you, Rob. Any more questions in the room? And if you're in Zoom and you have a question, you can raise your hand and we'll get back to you.
Now, I'm curious, did you see evidence of damage by deer? Like if you have a garden in Ann Arbor or South Township, the deer will come and eat any native plants that you plant. So I'm wondering if they're also eating the native plants in the reserve.
I know we did see deer out there. Almost every time we went out to do a bird survey, we scared up a fawn or like saw a deer in the field running across. Something that we've noticed out there is that we're not seeing a lot of oak regeneration. So that could be for multiple reasons. I guess first, there's not fire going through there. A lot of like the dry mesic, southern forest, oak hickory forest is reliant on fire for oak regeneration, but the deer will also eat it. So if we have too many deer, then they could be eating those oak saplings. So that is a possibility, but we don't know for sure.
Bob Calhoun has a raised hand. Oh, sorry, Liz.
No, go, hop, yeah.
Okay. Would you like to unmute?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Anna. Yes, I would agree with you, Rob. Excellent job, very informative. I'm very excited about some of the new species. that weren't detected or weren't there in 2021. I mean, yellow-throated vireo. I mean, that's just a quality bird. Scarlet tanager. How many places can we go in Washtenaw County and even hear or see of scarlet tanager? That's they require so much large forest, unfragmented, no roads, and yet they're there. The wood thrush is, I think, the most exciting bird that I heard. The fact that Bria, that you and Ella found a nest and got a photo of it. I mean, that's just, we've got to treasure that photograph. I got to tell you, all the woodpeckers, the owls, of course, our wonderful, wonderful great blue herons. We love, of course, our rose-breasted grosbeak. I wanted to make a note that, and I may have this wrong, but Anna, I think that you and your partner found, was it 40 breeding species just in West Scio Preserve 2 years ago? Is that, or am I wrong? It was something like that. But now we're up to 64 species. And the thing that really stood out in terms of numbers is I wrote down 10 new species in the new part of the property. And by the way, the 2020, was it 2021? That actually applies to all 3 tracks east of the heron rookery. They're all purchased recently. You have 2003 for the eastern track. It's actually 2021. You might want to amend that. That 93 acres almost doubled the size of the preserve, and I think people, at the time were asking. I know, Lisa, you and I were, I think, on the Land Preservation Commission together, and that was a lot of money we spent on that 93 acres, but look what we have, 10 new species that are breeding in our preserve by just expanding it by that number of acres. I think that's, congratulations to the Land Preservation Commission and shepherding along that offer for us to buy that property, 93 acres. I guess my real question, sorry, taking so long, is what people did you see on the preserves? What were they doing? Were they doing cartwheels? Were they looking at birds? Were they hiking? Did they have a dog with them? Was the dog on a leash? I know that wasn't it wasn't the focus of your research, but you were out there so much, you can tell us, are the preserves being used? And if so, what kind of uses? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hal. I guess that's a good point about the 2003. I think we used Map Washtenaw for that. Am I right, Anna? And that came up as 2003. So we're
that is incorrect. It was purchased in 2021. There's 93 acres, all east of the heron rookery, and there were 3 tracts of 30, 30, and 20 acres approximately. So the field that's on the corner of Stabler and Park was bought in 2021.
Okay, so yeah, we'll update that then. Thank you.
Thanks.
In terms of park usage, yeah, we did see some people out there. When we were out there, we did see a lot of people using the trail, and when we talked to them, they said they're on a lunch walk. So I think there's that, Dino Drive is an industrial drive, and there's people that work down there. So they're actually enjoying that on their lunch break, which is great. There's people with dogs. Someone actually this morning was out there with a dog, not on a leash, but it was a nice dog. And the new trail that the Stuart Salmon Walker just made south of Scio Farms is seeing some usage already, which is great.
Good.
We did not see anybody back there before. I don't think people even knew it was a preserve. Now that we have a trail back there, yeah, we're seeing people walking it. But no carpets.
And then what about anyone watching birds? My understanding is that eBird, when you put things in eBird, birders or that want to see new birds are watching. And I met someone out there the year that Anna, you were out there with James, and I asked them, this is I think maybe before you came, maybe in beginning of May or earlier, and the fellow said, well, I didn't know there was anything here, but I saw something on eBird, so I kept driving around trying to figure out where that point was to see that scarlet tanager. Well, I forget now what bird it was, but it was funny that he had no idea there was a preserve there and didn't really care. He was just trying to find the scarlet tanager that was on eBay.
Yeah, there might have been some people out there looking for birds. Nothing like, I feel like there wasn't anybody that I saw out there anyway that was like, just totally like that was their whole goal of being out there. But I'm sure the people out there, I'm sure they're paying attention to birds and noticing them. I don't know.
Well, you were out there and you were looking.
I was out there. Me
Okay.
and Ella were both out there.
Count yourself in.
Liz, did you have a question?
Oh, I just wanted to ask you, did you say that there are fewer snakes and that's why the hairy woodpecker is declining?
Snags. Like dead snags.
Oh, snags.
Dead trees.
Oh, so places to live. Okay, cool.
I thought she said snakes too.
I should have been more clear on that.
Yeah, no, good. All right, good to know.
Thank you for bringing that up. I'm glad that's clarified.
You mentioned salamanders, Bria, real quick. Ella, salamanders? You mentioned it and then just dropped it.
I know.
Go ahead, Ella.
I know we didn't survey for salamanders. I know in Anna's report, there was they were looking at different organisms, but we
Okay,
weren't.
I'm sorry. I thought you had found salamanders, but okay, you didn't. Sorry.
That might have been mentioned in about the vermicle.
Yeah.
There's that live in there.
Any other questions in the room or on Zoom?
I'm interested in hearing more about the night bird survey. What did you learn? I know that you listed, but is there anything going on in the forest at night? Or is it just a dead place?
There's a lot going on in the forest at night.
Coyotes.
Yes.
But yeah. Okay, yeah, I think I was gonna mention that in there. I must have forgot it. We started just before sunset and went until about an hour after sunset. So the whole thing was about an hour and a half of sitting out in the woods. But we played our playback maybe about an hour in and then listened after that. So we still had some time to listen after we used our playback.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that you said that we have both eastern screech owls and barred owls and great horned owls. And guess what? One of the birds that, in terms of predators or any kind of predator, that eastern screech owl needs to worry about? Great horned owls. So it's interesting they're in the same forest. I just wonder what the strategy of a screech owl is, which is much, much smaller, obviously, to avoid becoming prey at night. I've always kind of wondered about that. To the great horned owl, that is.
Right, and that was something we actually kept in mind too. When we were using our playback, we chose not to do playback for the great horned owl because it's a predator of even other owls. So we didn't want to use playback for that one and then not be able to hear the other owls because then they'll just be quiet and hiding from the great horn.
Quick question about the old fields. I know you did some, I forget now how you described it, but you wandered through the fields looking for breeding birds. What did you see in terms of seedlings, any at all? And if so, were they native?
We did see a few oaks, and I think Javi might have been out there with us when we saw that. There are a few native prairie plants out there too, like sedges. But there wasn't anything that we really noticed. No, not too many tree saplings, but there could have been some. We could have just not really been paying attention to them. They could have been, closer to the ground, but we're actually looking up at the birds. So we could have missed them for sure. They could have been out there.
I think we have time for one more question here. I see Rob with his hand raised. Would you like to unmute?
Well, I guess I can respond to that. I'm Will. We're looking at the possibility of other properties in the area that might be used to expand the size of the reserve and effectively be buffers. We haven't really established any kind of management plan, which is not really the Land Preservation Commission's role. But we're happy to have it, and I think the suggestions that were made here are certainly good ones to manage it, perhaps as a prairie, and I personally vote for that.
I think that question is just an excellent segue into, I wanted to highlight one more time, the report that Bria and Ella will be putting out on the 28th, which will be on the homepage. There's like that little square that transitions through a few announcements. One of them will be a link to their report. So Bria and Ella just shared great information with us, and believe it or not, this was just a little bit of their research, and it was made extremely accessible for all of us today. If you want to sit down with a good cup of tea and like really learn and see exactly what they did and read all of their management suggestions, that will be in this report.
Awesome.
And they'll go further into detail about the options for those old fields.
Wow.
Good.
I would second your vote of confidence for maybe some recreated wetlands, fens. I mean, I think Bria and Ella, you mentioned some native sedges and other wetland plants that are already established there. So it could be some water management going on there, maybe allow areas to become flooded and have those native prairie and wet prairie plants sort of give them an advantage to fill in and to increase area.
Thank you, Hob, and thank you all for your great questions and feedback. I'd love to, one more time, give Bria and Ella a round of applause. Thank you all for coming in Zoom and in person.
Great work. That was really good.